Hello everyone, welcome to another video. I've had this project in mind for a couple months now. I've been waiting for the perfect moment to come in order to record and make this video. However, the perfect moment never comes. You just have to take the moment and make it perfect. Anyhow, the subject of today's video is about perennial philosophy, and that is its origin, importance, its characteristics, and so forth. Very few people have any awareness of this very important school of thought in philosophy. The majority of those persons who study philosophy are either interested in modern Western branches of philosophy, analytical philosophy, existentialism, and so forth, or perhaps Stoicism, Aristotelianism, Platonism, many important schools of thought, but very few people have any awareness of perennial philosophy. And this is, I would say, the main reason is because it is not taught in universities. Very few people have devoted serious, rigorous academic papers to this realm of thought. And for this reason, it is not that established in academia, but it is gradually being resuscitated by the works of such great figures like Professor Harry Oldmeadow, Sayyid Hossein Nasr, and many others who have rendered great service to perennial philosophy, and it is gradually being incorporated into academia, but that would require many years, of course, to be fully established. Now, in today's video, we're going to talk about the origins of perennial philosophy, how it came to be, some of its characteristics, and some important perennialists as well. Now, what is perennial philosophy and how it came to be? Let's find out. Saint Augustine, the Christian mystic and philosopher, has written in his book of Confessions, "Wisdom uncreate, the same now as it ever was and ever will be." Now, this wisdom uncreate has carried many different names all throughout history. Different traditions have given it different names. For example, Philosophia Perennis in Latin, Sanatana Dharma in Sanskrit, Hagia Sophia, Lex Aeterna, Din al-Haq, Hikmatul Atiqa, and so forth. Now, all these different names have been given to this timeless wisdom by different traditions. And this wisdom is, of course, formless and universal, and it is from a supra-individual source, so it does not belong to any particular area, particular time, history, or civilization and tradition. It does not belong to anyone. It is the birthright of humanity, as Kumaraswamy said. It is something which forever existed from the genesis of time and will continue to exist. It is perennial, perpetual, and eternal. It is usually taken to indicate that some sort of continuous theme runs throughout the history of philosophy, that certain enduring and lasting truths are recognizable in the philosophical writings of all historical periods. Philosophia Perennis is a philosophy which endures. Its truth is considered to persist from generation to generation, long after ephemeral philosophical fads and fashions come and go. It has also been said that perennial philosophy is concerned with doctrine. It is not mere speculation and theory. It is a doctrine and a method which takes the individual and attaches him or her to his or her higher self, to the ultimate selfhood. It is a method in order to understand the nature of reality, the absolute reality, the essence of things. It is not theory alone. It is theory and practice. It's pragmatic and theoretical at the same time. It is no less rigorous than modern philosophical schools of thought, but in fact it is harder because it sort of involves all that we are. That is, one must be spiritually qualified in order to master the perennial philosophy. It is not something that has to do with the mind alone, but a person has to be spiritually qualified and has to be virtuous. Now, the doctrines of perennial philosophy can be summarized in the following terms. The phenomenal world is a manifestation of a divine ground. Human beings are capable of attaining immediate knowledge of that ground. In addition to their phenomenal egos, human beings possess an eternal self which is of the same or like nature with the divine ground. This identification with the self is life's chief end or purpose. Now, as we said before, perennial philosophy is universal and immutable. And for this reason, it is completely different from other philosophical schools of thought that undergo change and are either refuted or being developed and so forth. But perennial philosophy is not like that. And perennial philosophy is never changing. It never changes. And if a perennial doctrine is true today, it is the same thing in 1,000 years from now. And 1,000 years ago, it was pretty much the same as it is today. So perennial philosophy is completely immune to change. Now, if you read the great writings of the sages of the past, whether it be Plato, Plotinus, Pythagoras, Meister Eckhart, Marsilio Ficino, Leibniz, Erigena, Dante, and many other great Western philosophers and sages, and compare it to the writings of the East, such as Bhagavad Gita, Rumi, Hafiz, Attar, and countless other figures, you see this remarkable similarity that exists between the two, between East and West. And this completely indicates the fact that all these people, all these great writers and sages and philosophers lived in the same universe of discourse, that they had the same metaphysical language, even though they were geographically very different from each other. Now, this indicates the fact that there was a common thread of metaphysics running throughout different traditions, which in a sense connected them intrinsically. Now, the idea of perennial philosophy is as ancient as you like. It's very ancient, and in fact, it goes back to prehistoric times. It always existed. But the term perennial philosophy is a relatively new one. The first usage, famous usage of the term perennial philosophy goes back to Leibniz, the great mathematician philosopher who responded in a letter to his friend, I believe Edmund was the name of the person to whom he wrote. But in the letter, Leibniz says that I follow the school of perennial philosophy and indicates that. Now, the letter that Leibniz wrote is the following. He says, "The truth is more widespread than one might think, but it is often concealed and frequently shrouded, even weakened, mutilated, corrupted by additions that spoil it or render it less useful. By pointing out these traces of truth in the ancients, or, to speak more broadly, in those who came before, one could extract gold from the mud, diamonds from the mine, and the light from the darkness, and thus philosophy might indeed achieve everlasting effects." Now, the term perennial philosophy, in those times at least, referred to the writings of Aristotle, Plato, Plotinus, and Pythagoras, the wisdom that was in these great writings. However, it is sometimes also debated that the term perennial philosophy was first used by another scholar named Agostinus Stoico, who was a librarian and who knew Arabic, and apparently borrowed the term perennial philosophy from Arabic Islamic sources. However, there's much debate whether or not it was Leibniz who first used it or Agostinus Stoico. Most scholars say that it was Agostinus Stoico who first used the term perennial philosophy and in fact wrote a book on this subject. In the modern world, the term perennial philosophy was popularized by a very important writer, novelist called Aldous Huxley, who wrote a book titled Perennial Philosophy, which was published, I believe, in 1944 or 1943, I'm not sure. But the book came out and it was a success. In a sense, many people were drawn to perennial philosophy, and it sort of popularized uh, perennial philosophy. However, his book, in a sense, had one downside to it, which was it kind of lacked the intellectual dimension. And many people believe that Aldous Huxley was an amateur in the field of perennial philosophy. Nevertheless, his book is very important. Ananda Coomaraswamy had read his works, and they were in contact with each other. It's a very important book. I haven't read it completely, but the few pages that I read, it was significant, and I think it can open up the mind to what perennial philosophy is. But if you really want to understand what perennial philosophy is, I highly suggest you to read the writings of the traditionalists, and that is people such as Ananda Coomaraswamy, René Guénon, and Friedrich Schuon, who is considered to be the greatest of the three. Now, reading the writings of these three great men, also with many other traditionalists such as Titus Burckhardt, Sayyid Hossein Nasr, and countless other figures, I think you will gain a far deeper understanding of perennial philosophy, especially in the writings of Friedrich Schuon, who is a remarkable, unparalleled metaphysician of the 20th century. I think I have all of his writings, and this man is incredible. His writings are just fabulous, and I don't think anyone can compete with him in the realm of perennial philosophy. He introduced another term called Sophia Perennis, which is, he says, it's more direct. In a sense, it has more to do with wisdom instead of using Philosophia Perennis. Now, one of the best definitions of perennial philosophy is given to us by a man named Friedrich Schuon, whom we just talked about. And in this book, The Essential Friedrich Schuon, which is edited by Sayyid Hossein Nasr, Schuon has this article called Sophia Perennis. Now, Schuon used the term Sophia Perennis instead of perennial philosophy, Philosophia Perennis. He believed that it is more direct. Now, as he says himself, Philosophia Perennis is generally understood as referring to that metaphysical truth which has no beginning, and which remains the same in all expressions of wisdom. Perhaps it would here be better or more prudent to speak of a Sophia Perennis, since it is not a question of artificial mental constructions, as is all too often the case in philosophy. Or again, the primordial wisdom that always remains true to itself could be called religio perennis, given that by its nature it in a sense involves worship and spiritual realization. Fundamentally, we have nothing against the word philosophy, for the ancients understood by it all manner of wisdom. In fact, however, rationalism, which has absolutely nothing to do with the true spiritual contemplation, has given the word philosophy a limitative coloring, so that with this word one can never know what is really being spoken about. If Kant is a philosopher, then Plotinus is not, and vice versa. With Sophia Perennis, it is a question of the following. There are truths innate in the human spirit, which nevertheless in a sense lie buried in the depth of the heart, in the pure intellect, and are accessible only to the one who is spiritually contemplative. And these are the fundamental metaphysical truths. Access to them is possessed by the Gnostic, Pneumatic, or Theosopher, in the original and not the sectarian meaning of these terms, and access to them was also possessed by the philosophers, in the real and still innocent sense of the word, for example, Pythagoras, Plato, and to a large extent also Aristotle. So far we have briefly introduced perennial philosophy and went over its origin, some of its characteristics, and discussed some of the important perennialists of the 20th century. Now let us provide an example of a perennial doctrine which is found amongst different traditions and religions. Consider the following quotations. Unto Tao all under heaven will come, as streams or torrents fall into a great river or sea. The final end of every torrent is the sea. Opposites and likes pertain to the waves, and not to the sea. Enter that ocean, that your drop may become a sea that is 100 seas of Oman. God is an infinite and indeterminate sea of substance. All things are as little unto God as the drop is to the wild sea. And so the soul, in drinking God, is deified, losing her name and her own powers, but not her essence. Now there is this remarkable similarity between these different quotations, between these different passages, which compares the divine essence to the sea and all manifestation and human beings and creatures in different existence to rivers or torrents that are flowing into the sea. Now, this is a remarkable example of a perennial doctrine. It shows the unanimity of thought that existed between different traditions in those times and how they spoke the same metaphysical language. Now, comparing the divine essence to the sea is a remarkable analogy because we know that perennial philosophy's language or lingua franca is symbolism, and the sea is a symbol for the divine essence. That is, it is the fountainhead of life onto which everything returns. We are, in a sense, the droplets of the sea. Manifestation has been compared many times by Rumi to the foam that is formed on the surface of the sea, and the divine essence and that unconditioned state, the unseen, is compared to the depth of the sea. And all these analogies are of great importance when it comes to perennial philosophy because it is the precise language of metaphysics. Now, such examples can be multiplied, and if you start reading the works of the traditionalists and the perennialists, you realize this incredible similarity and the symbolism that is used in different traditions which convey the same meaning. Now, you will, of course, understand this if you read it yourself, especially the works of Rene Guénon and Ananda Coomaraswamy. They have emphasized on the importance of symbolism many, many times. Guénon has this work called Sacred Science of Symbolism, something like that, in which he discusses the different symbolisms of symbolical language of different traditions and the symbolism of different elements and so forth. And so this is also found in Friedrich Schwann and Ananda Coomaraswamy as well. There are, of course, certain objections to perennial philosophy. Many people have disagreed with it or criticized it. And it is, in fact, a realm of thought which is not so accessible to the modern mind. Many people nowadays have difficulty understanding such a thing. Perennial philosophy is not that understood between us. It is something that is very strange for some people. For some reason, modern people are more attracted towards existentialism or German idealism, things like that, or analytical philosophy. Only a handful of people are attracted to traditional philosophies, metaphysics, or in other words, perennial philosophy. Now, I think it really goes back to the mentality and our own education. One of the objections to perennial philosophy is that people say that perennial philosophy thinks that all religions are the same. That is, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism are the same thing. Now, this is, of course, a misunderstanding of perennial philosophy. It never says that all these religions are the same. In fact, it emphasizes the relative differences that exist between, let's say, for example, Christianity and Islam, Hinduism and Buddhism, or so forth. However, it talks about a transcendent unity between them. Now, one of the books of Friedrich Schwann is called The Transcendent Unity of Religions, in which he discusses this in a masterful way, in a masterly fashion. And he says that different religions have, of course, different similarities. Some of them are superior to others in some respects, but all of them stem from one supra-formal essence, which is the divine essence or God. It all stems from God and it all returns to Him. So in that sense, perennial philosophy is universal and is based on tradition. So it doesn't say that all religions are the same. This is very important. Schuon has written many passages about this. And I think that perennial philosophy is very practical compared to other realms of philosophy. It is because its end purpose is the liberation of man and woman. It is something that it tries to liberate the individual from the sufferings and all the contingencies of the world. It tries to make people aware of their real identity, that is, their self with a capital S. Its goal is to reach that ultimate selfhood, that being, that entity, that dimension within us which is unconditioned and does not die, it is not born, it is something which is immune from death, change, and so forth, and forever exists. Perennial philosophy is a means in helping us to achieve that end, that is, our familiarity with and identification with ourself. Now, I hope that this video was helpful. We tried to give a very brief introduction to perennial philosophy. Of course, the subject is much deeper than this. However, it was our attempt to provide a very brief introduction to perennial philosophy. If you did enjoy this video, please subscribe, like, and comment. It will be very helpful for our projects. Now, thank you very much for watching. Done.